Did you know that right now, in 2025, American students are facing rejection rates that would have been unthinkable just 5 years ago? I'm talking about 90% visa denial rates in countries that were once educational havens for Americans. In countries where getting accepted to university meant you were practically guaranteed entry. That assumption, it's dead. While American families are scraping together hundreds of thousands of dollars for domestic college tuition, dreaming of more affordable international alternatives, immigration officers in these nations are systematically saying no. Not to a few students here and there, but to nearly everyone who applies. This isn't just about paperwork delays or temporary COVID restrictions. This is a fundamental shift in how the world views American students, and it's happening faster than anyone anticipated. The numbers I'm about to share with you aren't coming from fringe websites or conspiracy theories. These are official government statistics, embassy reports, and real stories from families who thought they had backup plans. What's emerging is a pattern so stark that it suggests something much deeper is happening in global education politics. The American student, once welcomed with open arms as a source of revenue and cultural exchange, is increasingly being seen as something else entirely. This isn't just about disappointed teenagers missing their gap year in Europe or parents scrambling for Plan B college options. What we're witnessing represents the quiet unraveling of a post-World War II educational order that positioned America as the world's academic superpower. For decades, the flow of students worked like this. The world sent its brightest to American universities, while Americans enjoyed reciprocal access to global institutions as a kind of educational birthright. That equilibrium is shattering. When countries start rejecting 9 out of 10 American student visa applications, they're making a calculated statement about America's role in their future. These aren't administrative hiccups or temporary policy adjustments. These are strategic decisions by governments that concluded that American students represent more risk than reward, more cultural friction than educational value. The ripple effects extend far beyond individual families. American universities have built entire international programs, assuming their students could study abroad as easily as they could transfer between states. Study abroad programs that took decades to establish are quietly shuttering. Sister city relationships that facilitated student exchanges are going dormant. Most troubling of all, this educational isolation is happening precisely when American students need global perspectives most. What makes this particularly unsettling is how silently it's occurring. There are no dramatic embassy closures or diplomatic incidents making headlines. Instead, visa application systems are simply becoming more restrictive, processing times are extending indefinitely, and acceptance criteria are becoming impossibly narrow. The message is clear, even if it's never officially stated. American students are no longer as welcome as they once were. Let's start with the most shocking case, and it's probably not where you'd expect. Number 1, Canada. Yes, Canada, America's polite northern neighbor that we've always treated as our educational backup plan. In 2025, Canadian universities are rejecting American student visa applications at an unprecedented 87% rate, and the reasons go deeper than you might imagine. The shift began quietly in late 2023 when Canadian immigration officials started categorizing American students as high-risk applicants. What does that mean exactly? It means they assume you won't return home after graduation. The irony is staggering. A country built on immigration is now treating Americans like potential permanent migrants who might overstay their welcome. The Canadian government isn't broadcasting this policy change, but the numbers don't lie. Last year, universities like the University of Toronto and McGill were accepting roughly 60% of qualified American applicants. This year, that number has plummeted to single digits. I spoke with Sarah Chin, a California mother whose daughter had been accepted to 3 Canadian universities but was denied a student visa despite having a 4.2 GPA and $200,000 in documented family savings. The rejection letter cited insufficient ties to home country, bureaucratic language that essentially means they don't believe she'll leave Canada after graduation. Sarah told me, "They treated my daughter like she was trying to sneak across the border, not attend university." The psychological impact on these families is devastating, but it reveals something more troubling about how Canada now perceives American economic and social stability. Number 2, the United Kingdom. Here's where things get culturally complicated, and you need to understand the deeper psychology at work. British universities are rejecting 92% of American student visa applications in 2025, but this isn't just bureaucratic gatekeeping, it's cultural retaliation disguised as policy. The turning point came during the 2024 academic year when several high-profile incidents involving American students went viral on British social media. American students complaining about bland British food and demanding campus accommodations that British students found entitled became national controversies. What started as typical cultural adjustment friction became a broader narrative about American students being unable to adapt to non-American environments. British immigration officers now scrutinize American applications for what they call cultural compatibility indicators. Here's how this plays out in real terms. When 19-year-old Marcus Williams from Texas applied to study at Edinburgh, his visa interview included questions about his ability to integrate respectfully with local customs, and whether he understood that American expectations of service and accommodation may not be met. These aren't standard visa questions, they're cultural purity tests designed to filter out Americans who might create what officials diplomatically call campus tension. The most revealing case involved Jennifer Martinez, whose acceptance to Oxford was conditional on signing a pledge that she would embrace British educational traditions without seeking to impose American pedagogical preferences. When her family's lawyer challenged this requirement, they were told it was now standard procedure for American applicants. The underlying message is unmistakable: we'll educate you, but only if you completely abandon your American identity while you're here. Number 3, Germany. This case reveals how economic nationalism is quietly reshaping student visa policies in ways that target American families specifically. German universities are denying 89% of American student visa applications in 2025, and the mechanism they're using is financially devastating for middle-class American families. Here's how Germany has weaponized their previously generous financial requirements. Until 2024, American students needed to demonstrate approximately €11,000 in blocked accounts to prove they could support themselves. That figure has now jumped to €45,000 per year, but here's the crucial detail: this money must be deposited in German banks 6 months before the visa application, and it cannot come from American education loans, family loans, or any debt finance source. It must be liquid family savings, transferred internationally and locked away where American families can't access it. What makes this particularly insidious is that German officials present this as a student welfare measure. They claim they're protecting American students from financial hardship, but the real effect is creating a wealth threshold that eliminates middle-class American applicants entirely. Only families with significant liquid assets can meet these requirements, effectively turning German education into a luxury good accessible only to wealthy Americans. The psychological warfare aspect becomes clear when you realize these requirements don't apply equally to all international students. Chinese students, for example, can use government-backed education loans to meet the financial threshold. Brazilian students can demonstrate family property as collateral. But American students face unique restrictions that seem designed to exploit weaknesses in the American financial system, specifically, our reliance on debt-financed education and our family's tendency to tie wealth up in real estate rather than liquid savings. Number 4, France. This is where historical resentment meets modern educational policy, and the results are particularly bitter for American families who thought cultural ties would matter. French universities are rejecting 94% of American student visa applications in 2025, and the reasoning reveals decades of accumulated frustration with American cultural dominance that's finally finding official expression. The French approach is the most psychologically sophisticated of all these restrictions. Rather than using blunt financial barriers or bureaucratic delays, French immigration officers have created what they call cultural integration assessments that are essentially designed to be failed by American applicants. These assessments require American students to demonstrate not just French language proficiency, but what officials term intellectual humility regarding French academic traditions. Let me give you a concrete example of how this plays out. When 18-year-old David Park from Oregon applied to study at the Sorbonne, his visa interview included questions about whether he believed American universities were superior to French institutions, whether he expected professors to accommodate American-style grade inflation, and most tellingly, whether he understood that French intellectual discourse operates at a more sophisticated level than typical American academic discussion. These aren't language assessments, they're ideological compliance tests. The most revealing case involved Emma Thompson, whose grandmother was actually French and who had been visiting France every summer since childhood. Despite being functionally bilingual and having deep cultural knowledge, her visa was denied because her interview responses allegedly showed insufficient deference to French pedagogical authority. The rejection letter specifically mentioned her American tendency to challenge professors rather than learn from them. What we're seeing here is France using educational policy to settle decades-old scores about American cultural imperialism, with individual students paying the price for broader geopolitical resentments. Number 5, Australia. Here's where manufactured security concerns become the perfect cover for what amounts to educational protectionism with an anti-American edge. Australian universities are denying 91% of American student visa applications in 2025, using a security screening process that treats American students as potential threats to national stability. The mechanism Australia has developed is particularly insidious because it operates under the guise of legitimate security protocols. American student visa applications now require what's called an enhanced background assessment that can take anywhere from 8 to 18 months to process. During this period, Australian security agencies conduct investigations that go far beyond typical criminal background checks. They examine applicants' social media histories going back to middle school, interview former teachers and employers, and most disturbing of all, assess what they call ideological compatibility with Australian values. Here's how this plays out in devastating detail. When 20-year-old Rachel Kim from Michigan applied to study marine biology at the University of Sydney, her application was flagged because she had posted Instagram stories supporting Black Lives Matter protests in 2020. The security assessment concluded that her history of participating in civil unrest made her unsuitable for Australian student status. Never mind that she had been peacefully protesting or that supporting civil rights would seem consistent with Australian democratic values. The real message was clear. American political engagement, even in legitimate democratic processes, is viewed as potentially dangerous radicalism. The most chilling aspect of Australia's approach is how they've weaponized American political polarization against American students. Applications are being denied based on family members' political donations, parents' social media posts, and even students' participation in perfectly legal political activities like campaign volunteering. Australia has essentially decided that American political culture itself is too toxic and divisive to allow into its educational system. Number 6, the Netherlands. This final case represents the most sophisticated form of educational discrimination I've encountered, one that uses Americans' own progressive values and cultural expectations against them in ways that are almost admirably calculated. Dutch universities are rejecting 93% of American student visa applications in 2025, and they've created a system that makes American students complicit in their own exclusion. The Dutch approach centers around what they call social responsibility integration protocols. On the surface, this sounds perfectly reasonable. They want to ensure international students contribute positively to Dutch society. But here's the psychological trap they've created specifically for American applicants. The protocols require American students to acknowledge their privilege of citizenship in a nation with disproportionate global environmental impact, and commit to lifestyle modifications that demonstrate genuine commitment to Dutch sustainability principles. What this means in practice is breathtaking in its cynical brilliance. American students must sign legally binding agreements to limit their carbon footprint to levels that are practically impossible for Americans to meet. They cannot fly home more than once per year. They cannot own or use personal vehicles. They must commit to veganism for the duration of their studies. Most invasive of all, they must submit to monthly sustainability compliance reviews, where Dutch officials monitor their consumption patterns, travel habits, and even dietary choices. The genius of this system is that it frames American cultural norms, flying home for holidays, eating meat, expecting personal transportation, as moral failures rather than cultural differences. When students inevitably struggle to meet these requirements or question their necessity, they're labeled as insufficiently committed to Dutch values. Lisa Rodriguez from California spent $15,000 on application fees and compliance monitoring only to have her visa revoked after she was caught eating a hamburger off campus. The violation notice stated she had demonstrated fundamental incompatibility with Dutch ethical standards. Now that we've examined these 6 cases individually, step back and look at the broader pattern emerging here, because what we're witnessing isn't random policy chaos. It's a coordinated recalibration of how the world views American soft power, and education is simply the battlefield they've chosen. The first pattern you need to understand is what I call bureaucratic plausible deniability. Notice how none of these countries have issued official statements saying, "We don't want American students." Instead, they've created administrative labyrinths designed to achieve that outcome without triggering diplomatic incidents. Canada frames it as an immigration risk assessment. The UK calls it cultural compatibility. Germany presents it as student welfare. France disguises it as academic standards. Australia wraps it in security concerns. The Netherlands packages it as environmental responsibility. Each justification sounds reasonable in isolation, but together they reveal a coordinated strategy to exclude American students while maintaining diplomatic civility. The second pattern is even more revealing. These restrictions specifically target American middle-class vulnerabilities. Think about this systematically. The financial requirements exploit the Americans' debt-dependent education system. The cultural compliance tests attack American individualism and directness. The security screenings weaponize American political polarization. The environmental protocols target American consumption patterns. These aren't coincidental policy choices. They represent a sophisticated understanding of American social and economic weaknesses, applied with surgical precision to exclude American students without appearing overtly discriminatory. But here's the most unsettling pattern of all. This represents the first time since World War II that American educational privilege has been systematically dismantled by allied nations acting in apparent coordination. The timing isn't accidental either. These restrictions accelerated precisely as global perceptions of American stability and leadership began deteriorating. So here we are, facing a question that goes to the heart of American identity in the 21st century. Is the American passport losing its power, and are we witnessing the end of educational globalization as we've known it? Because what we've just examined isn't really about student visas at all. It's about the systematic dismantling of assumptions that have shaped American middle-class life for 3 generations. Think about what this means for the families watching this video right now. For decades, American parents could assume their children would have educational options beyond our borders. Study abroad wasn't just a luxury, it was a safety valve that made expensive American higher education seem manageable. If domestic college costs became unbearable, there was always Europe, always Canada, always somewhere that would welcome American students with their dollars and their ambition. That assumption is evaporating in real time, and most American families don't even realize it's happening. But here's the deeper question we need to confront. Are these countries wrong? When French officials question whether American students can engage with intellectual traditions beyond their own cultural framework, when Dutch authorities demand Americans modify their consumption patterns, when Canadian immigration officers worry Americans won't return home after graduation, are they responding to real patterns of American behavior, or are they creating justifications for decisions already made for other reasons? The most troubling possibility is that this educational isolation is just the beginning. If allied nations are comfortable excluding American students using these sophisticated bureaucratic mechanisms, what prevents them from applying similar logic to American tourists, American workers, or American businesses? We might be witnessing the early stages of a much broader recalibration of America's place in the global community. So I want to know what you think. Are these countries protecting their educational systems from legitimate American cultural problems, or are they using manufactured concerns to settle larger geopolitical scores? And more importantly, what happens to American global influence when the next generation grows up educationally isolated from the rest of the world? Subscribe now because this story is just beginning. Tell me your thoughts in the comments.